Welcome. Thank you very much for turning up. This is going to be an extremely fascinating, extremely revealing session with an extremely talented panel of contributors. And at the end of it, you will know exactly what Extreme Factual is. Just to get us in the mood, we're going to play a little clip reel that Channel 4 put together with some of the highlights of what they're calling the extreme factual genre. So let's play that, please. I hope everybody could see without the blinds down. I don't know about you, but I feel like I need to lie down after watching that. I'm going to start by introducing the panel. So at the end, we have Dominic Harrison from Channel 4, head of legal there, who's had many sleepless nights looking after some of these shows. We have David Dugan, who was the executive producer of Mutiny, one of the shows there, and is also the managing director of Windfall films. Kelly Webb-Lamb, now head of Factual Entertainment at Channel 4, and also previously ran Shine TV, which produced The Island. Is that right? Here we have Moses Adeyemi, contestant and winner of SAS Who Dares Wins. Thank you very much for coming along to be part of this. And Colin Barr, who was the executive producer on SAS and also the creative director of Minnow. So thank you very much, everybody. A real assembly of talents here, I think. So I'm just going to start by asking David, what's the most extreme thing you've ever asked the contributor to do?
Well, the mutiny comes pretty close, but I did once ask an 80-something-year-old to put his hand in a fire ant's nest to see what it was like, and he was quite keen to do it, but I didn't stop him when he was, you know.
Was that David Attenborough?
No, it wasn't. It was a man called E.O. Wilson, a scientist, but he did it.
You did it. And Colin, what about you? What's the worst thing you think you've ever asked?
Actually, the worst thing we did was for you, which was a guy free-falling from the edge of space beyond the speed of sound. That was quite risky.
That was quite risky, wasn't it? Definitely. This is, Kelly, I want to start with you, and I think there's a clip we might look at in a minute, but just to sort of set up, I want to ask you to think back, actually, to when you were a supplier and when you were first thinking about the island. This is quite a loose, quite a broad assembly of programmes in many ways. They have as many differences, I think, as similarities, and a lot of viewers would probably see them as, you know, travel or reality or history, and yet there is something that holds them all together, and they've turned out to be some of Channel 4's most successful programmes. They have rated very well. They've skewed younger than a lot of things on the channel, sort of really capturing that sort of crucial 16 to 34 grouping for the channel. So they're together, they work to sort of say something about the channel, but they're not sort of a neat genre, and they've come from many different parts, I think, of the commissioning setup in Channel 4. So when you were pitching in with The Island, how conscious were you that you were pitching what's come to be known as extreme factual? How conscious were you of danger being part of the cell? What was your pitch?
Not conscious at all, I would say. I think the original pitch for The Island, and it was Tim Whitwell from Shine's idea, was a very simple idea, which was about a kind of pub dream stroke fantasy that people have, which is, could I survive on a desert island? And when we first talked about it, it was very much about masculinity and men, and that kind of dream of getting away. It felt like an aspirational fantasy that people talked about and wondered. And that was, I think, the thing that resonated immediately with Liam, who was then doing the job I'm now doing at Channel 4, was that kind of the resonance of that idea. So I think the extremeness of it came later, but I do think now, looking back, the thing that makes The Island special, and I think it's true of all of the programmes that we're talking about today, is that actually when you strip people of the kind of comforts that we're used to, what you get is who they are. And so by the extreme situations that people are put in, the sort of strength of their character or the kind of essence of their character comes to the fore. And I think that's why, for example, with The Island, you know, there's lots of talk about the fact that these shows skew male, but actually The Island doesn't skew male.
It's the exception, actually, in that
It's the
respect,
exception,
isn't it? Yeah.
and I think that is because it really is about who we are. So you get to the kind of essence of humanity, and I think that's something that is really important to these shows.
Could we play a clip?
Yeah.
Because I think that it's a very interesting illustration of what you're getting at there. Interesting. Colin, do you recognise what Kelly's saying about the value of sort of really quite brutally and literally stripping people of sort of their supports, if you like, in order to get at what documentary often, sort of claims to be getting at, which is the essence of people's character and personality?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think in the end, these sorts of constructed factual programmes, they generate the kind of content that you'd be looking for in any documentary about any subject, but it needs to be done with purpose. It's not good enough just to kind of throw people into an extreme situation and then go, hey, look, we've stripped all the layers away and all that's left is a vulnerable human being, and then let's start poking them with a big stick. It's got to be, you've got to feel like there's some point to it, and in the end it's got something to say that's got some value. And I think the bar is quite high for that. It has to come with a documentary sensibility and a desire to understand something about human beings. And you look at Moses at the end of SAS, you were absolutely stripped down to your most vulnerable. But I hope that having watched Moses over the course of 5 hours of television, you felt like you'd got to understand something about human beings and men, particularly.
Looking back in particular, is that a moment that you're proud of, you regret, you feel naked about when you look at, or very comfortable with?
I think proud would be an understatement of how I felt. Like going into SAS, I believed in myself. I knew I had the abilities to survive it, but to pass it and come on top of it was just, I didn't dream of it. Everybody knows I was like the last person to even qualify for this show because of my fitness levels. But I think SAS brought a part of me that I never knew existed, something a lot deeper, and I think that's something that the audience can't take it away from just 5 hours of 2 weeks that we was out there, do you know what I mean? So documentaries like this just create a new person within yourself, and you have this new sense of responsibility that you can do a lot more with your physical self and your mental well-being.
Can I just say something before this started? Moses was saying about that clip that when he got back into the dorm, he thought that he was off camera because he thought, so the bit, he held it together when he was first told that he'd won, and he thought, right, I'm strong, I'm resilient, I'm going to hold it together. Yeah. And then he was left alone and he thought that was fine, and then you just let yourself go, didn't you?
Yeah.
Forgetting that the cameras were everywhere.
For me, I didn't tell my family about me winning the show, but when they saw me crying, that was the first time anyone saw me cry in over 10 years. Right. Because I've never been pushed. You guys know part of my life story, but I've never been pushed to that extreme before, and that was like I did it, and there's a whole new person within me that I never knew what was there. So that was tears of satisfaction.
Yeah, yeah. So would you say it sounds like, to sort of try and wrap what was a very extensive experience up into one trite phrase, that you found yourself in adversity. Do you think that's, to what extent do you think everybody would have that experience going through? You had a very positive experience. Would you anticipate most people in this room might well have the same experience?
Me, honestly speaking, and I'm not just saying it, I feel everybody in this room has the ability to pass SAS, but it's
It's trying to make you feel better about yourselves, but
I have to be honest about that. If we're not gonna just base it on fitness levels, because we can all train. Because I believe one of the most unfittest guys that
I know, but look at you, it's not like...
No, but my point was SAS was something I trained for. I didn't just wake up in the morning and I thought I could do it. I trained for it and I mentally prepared myself. And I think the key thing is to have purpose, as you said earlier, because without purpose, you won't achieve anything in life. Mm-hmm. So in your work, in your family, in your relations, you need purpose, you need a reason. And I think that's what kept me going, because I had a purpose. I didn't want to do it just for the sake of doing it. I wanted to do it to prove something to myself and to my family and to the people that I work with. So if you guys all had a reason why you was doing it, I believe everybody can.
I think we should just stop there because that's so inspiring. Sorry,
I was
Jenny.
just going to say, I think that feeds really exactly into the clip of Aaron as well, which was about him. He had a real reason for why he was there, and it was a personal reason, and it carried him through, and without him, who knows what would have happened there. And I do think that one of the other things that is really special about this kind of genre is that it allows certain issues to be brought to a big audience that would be very difficult to do in a kind of straight doc way. So you could say grief. You know, his story was about grief. In the series, three of the Island, we saw a little clip of her there. Hannah, who was a veteran, had a terrible struggle with PTSD, and again, that was brought to screen in a way that I think it would have been quite hard to put in a single doc. So I think that it does allow for important stories to be told in a way that's actually entertaining and compelling for the audience. There's something really special in that.
And maybe get a different audience. David, I want to come to you in a moment, but just all three of you for a moment. Actually, particularly Colin and you, Kelly. To what extent, then, do you cast, if you like, for people who you think are going to go on a very significant personal journey? I mean, are you let's put it crudely, are you hunting for people who have got something that you believe they're going to work through as a result of this, incredibly immersive experience, or is that just fortuitous?
No, I think you are. I mean, you are carefully considering who does it. You're not always going for the obvious television stories. I mean, you need to look for stories that are surprising, unusual, that where you're not just casting people because you think they're going to cry or you think they're going to break down over the course of the piece. So it's a hard thing to get right. But we in the second series of SAS, we had a father of a soldier who died in Afghanistan, a guy called Ephraim. I don't know who's seen it, but I was really, really worried about him doing it at all, because for two reasons. One, I wanted to be sure that he was doing it for the right reasons, but I was really worried that it might look like a bit of a cynical casting decision, like deliberately putting a grieving father into a situation like that, where he was sort of trying to get close to his son through the experience of doing that course. But in the end, all of my concerns were absolutely flattened by him and by how extraordinary the experience was for him, everything that he got out of it, and the fact that in the end my fears were my fears, they weren't his. He was more than capable of doing it, and in the end drew a huge amount from it, and everybody's response to it was incredibly positive. So in some respects I think I was being too sensitive.
I mean, I would say that I think the answer to that is yes, of course, the casting process is extremely carefully, done and thought through. But certainly the really important thing with the island, I think, is that the cast has always been genuine. They are people who genuinely want to do this. They genuinely sit there and think, I would love nothing more than to survive on a desert island. And so I think they then have their own personal reasons in there, which allows you to get to those stories. What they aren't, what the casting isn't, is kind of reality casting. Let's put huge characters in that are going to clash with each other. And, it's those are real people that we relate to and we know. But through casting in that way, it does allow you to get to the stories that resonate with all of us. So they're not, they're not stories that we don't know, but they're perhaps stories that aren't normally brought to such a big, broad audience, and with the island to a young audience. And, it's an entertainment show fundamentally, but it's done with an absolutely documentary heart.
Dominic, this question of sort of how we populate a constructed show like this, like these with purpose. There's a lot of responsibility sitting there, isn't there, for the kind of situations that Colin clearly has had to think very, very deeply about, and others in this space. From a legal point of view, is there a risk that we could mollycoddle contributors, do you think? Or is that something that, we just have to do as programme makers?
Well, it's the first time I've ever heard anybody use the term mollycoddle in relation to these kind of programmes. I suppose there's a difference between the island and SAS and the kind of programme where you're putting members of the public into situations and a programme like Levison Wood's walks across the Nile or whatever, where you're dealing with professional explorers, military people who are going to go to places and go to dangerous environments. But fundamentally, what you do is the same, because you have to care for the people that you are putting into those situations, and you have to gather information to work out what it is that they're actually going to be able to do and how they're going to react to changing situations. Because the best planning in the world before you leave the UK, or before you start on whatever the programme is, you can do that. But actually, if you looked back at the risk assessments and the plans that are put together, they will never be how things have developed. So you always have to have a planning situation where you can react, and you've tried to game out different scenarios, you've tried to plan for eventualities. And part of that is looking at the contributors and looking at what their abilities are, what their particular medical histories are, what their psychology is, whether or not they have any particular, disabilities or medical history that might impact on their ability to deal with what you're asking them to do. If you don't do that, what happens is you haven't narrowed down the risk variables enough. So if something does happen when you're actually engaged in the filming process, you're not able to deal with it because you haven't planned for it. So, that comes down to things like working out, well, if you've got somebody who's got diabetes, how are there supplies of insulin? What happens if they lose their insulin? That kind of, planning for eventuality.
But you're talking there primarily about sort of known unknowns. Shit does happen on these shows, and things have gone wrong. You've talked about a situation where, I think essentially your concern centred around sort of, I suppose, mental health and welfare.
Yeah.
There's also been instances of accidents, hasn't there, on these series? Do we need to worry about that, or, as I say, are we sort of, by and large, people taking part in these shows are, responsible adults? So long as we're happy about that, are the physical risks just part and parcel of being grown-ups and so take part?
You can't sign away your liability for it. No matter what people say they are prepared to do, a production company, a broadcaster can still be held liable. It doesn't matter what bit of paper anybody signs to say, I'm happy to win for anything. So there's that aspect of it. The other thing is, you can't pretend that you're operating in some kind of unregulated environment, because you're not. If you send a film crew out to a place, hostile environment to film, you need insurance. And you're only going to get insurance if you've got a plan in place that actually plans for the eventualities. So it's a fact of life. Now, my job as a lawyer at Channel 4 is to try and clear away a lot of the risk factors to make sure that people can get their insurance and can actually get a programme to air. That's the fun of it, that's the challenge of it. It's an unusual role for a lawyer sometimes. I suspect we get asked to sit in on security meetings and planning meetings because we're notoriously picky bastards who will argue the toss with anybody, even if they have been in the SAS. So,
Ken, you've had, actually I think the safety records of all of these shows is quite astonishing given, what people are really going through. But you have had one or two incidences on the island, haven't you? As both supplier in a previous life and as broadcaster now, how close to the line do you feel that the output's sailing at the moment?
I think it is a very fine balance, and I mean, obviously, Dom's position is exactly right, and I would say that as a programme maker and a commissioner as well, that, yes, we do have to worry about it. There is a responsibility to worry about it, not only a legal responsibility, but a kind of moral and editorial responsibility. But within that, what you're trying to do all the time is to still allow people agency. So we can't pretend that they're going to do this on their own, in which case they can do what they want and it's their risk, because they're not. So it isn't their risk, and I think that the responsibilities are many, as I say. But what you're always trying to do is to kind of find space within that for them to make their own decisions and have their own agency. But it is really difficult because, exactly as has just been said, you do all of your due diligence at the beginning before they go, but particularly on the island, when they're there, they have been starving, thirsty, freezing, wet for however many weeks. And so it's a continual process of risk assessment. And it's terrifying, and thankfully everyone's been all right, but I do think that it's absolutely essential that we kind of make sure that we are the right side of the line, but continually interrogate what that means.
I'd like to dig in a bit more into this thing of what we put contributors for the sake of telly. And David, I think you've got a clip, haven't you, from Mutiny, which is from a part of the show where water supplies are running fairly low. Well, fuck that, That's how it's David. Just tell us a bit more about.
I should perhaps just say that was. This is in the very last programme, and this was the first time we'd actually had to intervene in any major way. So the whole way.
The rules up to then were.
Yeah, the bubble. And I can show in a minute just so that other clip just show you how we kept that bubble going. But so we really did not want to intervene. But it did reach this stage where Luke, the doctor, on board, started to notice that Fred's pulse rate had dropped to the most alarming level. And so asked for a second opinion because we had another medic on the support ship. And of course, when he went over to check out Luke, he suddenly saw, we were all watching, but he suddenly saw just how badly dehydrated they were. And the tricky thing is that, unlike Bligh and his men, they had lots of rain in the last phase of the voyage. Our guys were stuck in the doldrums and it was sunny. So that was the way we had to try and sell it to them, because you can imagine, you've done this whole thing, they've collected the water, they've done it all, and they've collected their own food, that they really have, and they've lost a lot of weight. They're losing it in many ways, and indeed losing the ability to decide whether or not they're dehydrated. And, obviously we couldn't be, I think if we'd left them, they would have made it, but would they have made it with intact kidneys? I'm not sure, and that was the call, and so in the end, they accepted it. But it was tough because they all wanted it. Ant Middleton on his own would say, bugger the safety ship, go away. He just never wanted us there. And when we did these, one of the things we had to do each time with these, to collect the rushes and so that we didn't intervene, was to collect the drives from the cameras that were on the boat, and indeed to collect the cameras. Obviously, we're operating in a very, very hostile environment in the sea. You can imagine our gear just gets trashed all the time. So twice a day we had to replace all the cameras and all the hard drives, but we didn't want to be, have a kind of, they didn't want to see us and we didn't really want to see them in the flesh. So we all kind of hid in the ship, and then someone, could we play the barrel section? It's a very short clip, and you can just see how we tried to preserve that bubble, because it was critical, really. That was how it's done.
I think that's the scariest clip in the whole thing, because the thought of using those rushes, terrifying.
Yeah, well.
But it's a good one to show, because it clearly, to approach the boat and intervene, to try and sort of get them to drink water, was a really big decision.
Yes.
But how, what was the debate on the backup ship, on the main ship, about whether to go over and intervene or not?
Well, there was a lot of phone calls to London.
How long did you leave them?
This was the point where we actually tested their urine, and that's when we realised just how bad it was, because obviously one of the cameramen just said, I know my body, and Ant said the same thing. I know my body. If he was in a hostile area and doing an SAS job, obviously that's okay. But this is a TV show, so it's not okay. So you have to. And in the end, they accepted it.
What would you have done if they had not accepted it? How?
Well, I think we'd have had to threaten them with the show being off. Though.
Right. Even if that wasn't true, you could have deployed that.
We couldn't let them carry on, and I think in the end, Luke managed to persuade them.
Might have been true.
I think in that case, it would have been.
The lawyer speaks.
We've taken people off planes when they were trying to go places where they hadn't properly planned for. They hadn't told us things they should have told us. It's a television show, It's you're not going to put people in a situation where they are going to suffer organ failure or whatever just because they think they know their own bodies. It's an interesting, what you're talking, it's quite interesting, quite often a conversation when you're making these kind of programmes is, oh, we want it to be authentic. Well, you're never going to make it authentic. You're not going back to the 18th century, you know.
But
you're not going to get cat nine tails out and flog the men.
No, but I think...
And the audience understand that, you know.
Well, they do, but I mean, I suppose you've got to put yourself in the mindset of the people on that boat, because they'd been reading, you know, Bligh's journal every day, and they were feeling like they were living it. I mean, they understood, you know, and that was an incredibly emotional thing for them. So to have, and they really tried to block the rest of it out. And so that's part of the power of these kind of shows.
That's why you don't leave the ultimate decision making to the people on the boat.
No, and not even to the doctor on the boat, because I think the doctor himself had turned a bit native, because he was, even though he knew in his heart that they needed water.
Presumably why you didn't have a doctor.
Little point being made here.
So can I just to add to what you guys are saying, and as much as I understand where you guys are coming from the safety aspect of it, but for contributors, and obviously I wasn't a meeting, but from SAS as a contributor, we notice health and safety, we notice them there. But as a contributor, I signed up to do a reality show. Now I understand you have to put health and safety in it, but when you guys jump in, you guys do take away a lot of reality, and we signed up for that. So it's not that, you know, we're saying you're not valid, but it is a bit frustrating for us. I think we had a couple of times where I think it was 100% humidity. I can't remember how hot it was, but we had to stop and stand in the shade because they're saying it was too hot. And there was me and a few other people. We were like, we don't care. We want to just keep going. And there was a few exercises that we wanted to do, but I wanted to do it as well, but health and safety came in and said, you can't do that particular punishment because it's too hot. Now I'm pumped, we're good to go. We're like, just give us the logs. Let's just keep going, we're good. But they were like, no, it's too hot.
But sometimes it's not about just the contributor or the person who wants to do whatever the task is. It's about the crew that are with them. It's about the people they might encounter. It's about, so, you know, you take people, I speak to people all the time and say, there's a front line there, we want to go to the front line. Well, that's okay. You might want to go to the front line, but do the soldiers who are accompanying you to the front line want to go to the front line and get shot at today? You know, do your camera crew want to get shot at today? So you have to look at these things in the round, and that's why, with the best one in the world, we always try to get to a result where everybody's happy, but sometimes, heat exhaustion being one, where you cannot take that risk, and it doesn't matter how much people argue with you.
Yeah.
The decision's not going to change any, because actually you have to think about the person not necessarily making the best decision for themselves and the other people who may be affected by their decision. So that's why
it does take away from the reality.
Yeah, well, it does, which is why,
because it's not. I think me and the boys were making jokes saying, well, if we were actually in the SAS serving right now, is the war going to stop because it's too hot? Which, you know what I'm trying to say, is something, are we going to go, oh, wait, guys, put the guns down, let's wait for the sun to go. We're not. So it does take away from the reality, and it does take away from the experience of what we signed up for.
As the only person in the room who's actually, if you like, been at the centre of one of these shows as a contributor, do you think that the team were wrong to step in with the mutiny and give them water? I mean, had you been in that boat?
I wouldn't say it was wrong, because I don't know the potential of what could have happened, but if I was in the boat, I would have said no, because I signed up for a reality experience, and if this is the case, this is the case. I think there's few people in the room that know things that I want to do with my life now, which is very difficult to do in terms of TV because of the health and safety element of it. But if we want reality, we should get that. But
I love that you're using the word reality in its true, authentic sense.
You would be, as someone, and what also started making them think, with them thinking about their families and all the rest of it. I mean, so it's not just their individual choice. They're thinking about the people back home and their families and what, you know, I mean, and for example, his wife was expecting a baby. It was due about a week later. You know, it's more than just what they were doing, and I think it was that kind of feeling that in the end made them realise.
And the truth is, in that situation, though, a lot of them would be willing to give up a kidney to keep going.
To be honest,
you know, there's a thing.
Well, yeah,
you
maybe.
Up a kidney.
No, it sounds. Do you know what it does?
No, seriously.
You know what? It does sound silly, but at the end of the day, that is what certain people sign up for, and it was not just me. It sounds, when I tell people the things I want to do in my life, it sounds crazy because you guys are not in there, but you know, there's loads of people that will do whatever they need to do to achieve something. You know, it's a mental thing. We want to go. We are not stopping till we get to the final destination, and you know, we don't want to be spoon-fed.
But
You know,
And I think I do think it's a really interesting point, and something that I think to make the best programmes, you have to continually be asking those questions. I mean, on the island, it comes up often, the question of intervention in terms of people's health and safety. But in that clip we watched with Aaron, they came on and put up a tarpaulin, and then he wanted to take it down afterwards, and some of the others didn't. So that question about exactly that, about who wants to have the reality, authentic experience, and where that what the line is, I think is something that is really difficult for us as programme makers. Because to be honest, as a programme maker, I'm with you, and I think I want it to be as real as it possibly can be. But there is a line which, as producers and broadcasters, we have to, you know, it isn't really, at the end of the day, it is a TV show, and as well as signing up for a real experience, you also signed up for a TV show, and that is a fact. So there are boundaries around that mean that there are lines that we can't cross, and I'm kind of with you in that I totally get where you're coming from, and it is frustrating, I think, from a producer's perspective sometimes, but the fact that it's a TV show means that it isn't real, and we've got to kind of work within those boundaries. But to get the best answer, it's about constant negotiation, interrogation, and thoughts, I think.
Well, I was going to say, do you think that these are fixed boundaries, or do you think there's something, you know, are they sort of responsive to, you know, what's out there in the ether, the zeitgeist, what other channels
legally
do?
They're fixed, aren't they? We have a legal responsibility.
I think there's a sliding scale, though, isn't there, when where you've got there's a level of public interest involved in it, or a hostile environment in which a real war is happening, and you're sending people into a real war who might be professionals, and you're making a judgment based on that, as opposed to constructing a situation that's a bit like something that exists in the real world, and then putting ordinary people through that, which in the end, regardless of how we feel about it, it's an entertainment format. That's the long and short of it. You have no public interest at all to fall back on.
What's your audience going to react? You know, if you have people on a boat who are dehydrating to the point of organ failure, your audience isn't going to want to see that. And if they do see it, they're going to be quite vociferously against it.
The fact is that when Bly delivered his men to the... Okay, he got them all there. But, I mean, half a dozen of them did die later, you know, from... You know, so... I mean, and I also... But, okay.
Dominic, I mean, there has been a death on one of the Lev shows, hasn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, sort of slightly, sort of... You know, I mean, not Matt Powers, the journalist who joined.
So there was a journalist who joined Lev's Walk, actually arranged by a co-producer. It wasn't arranged by us. Very experienced journalist. He had walked in the Amazon. He had worked for a very reputable magazine who have people going to very dangerous environments, and he died of heat exhaustion. And there was, you know, they had lots of water with them, and they tried to cool him down, but he had got to the point where his body just was not going to moderate his heat properly, and there was nothing. They were too far away from any medical attention to be able to do anything about that. And you know, that is the kind of risk where we plan for heat and cold wherever we have people going, but it's an eventuality that can occur. And I think, despite the fact that we were, you know, as a channel, we weren't legally responsible, I think everybody involved in that show felt in some way some kind of, you know, you felt you should have been responsible in some way, or something should have been done about that. I don't think there was anything that could have been done about it. But I think that's the other thing you have to remember about doing these kind of shows, whether it's, you know, it's that you will all feel responsible if something goes wrong. You know, we had a very, you know, Made in Chelsea had a plane crash when they were abroad last year, and, you know, that has an enormous impact on, you know, thankfully nobody seriously hurt, but it's an enormous impact on the team and on the people trying to make the programmes. And as Colin says, there is a difference between, you know, we will have crews. The most dangerous work that I have advised on is not the kind of island things, not even Lev's expeditions, where, you know, you will allow him and his crew, because they are expert and have experience, to probably take risks that you wouldn't allow a member of the public to take, because you know they are equipped to deal with the risk and it won't turn into hazard. But there isn't much, the public interest justification for doing that is not the same as sending reporters to war zones and to go undercover in Syria or whatever, things we have done. But even then, the planning is the same. It has to be meticulous. But it does factor into whether or not the kind of contributor I want to go to a certain place. Obviously, if you've got a very experienced, seasoned journalist who says, I think I can go to this place, get film and get out, you're going to listen to them in a way that you won't listen to somebody who was only cast 6 weeks ago for a reality show. Because that's one of the things I was saying earlier. You have to gather in information. Who are you dealing with? What have they done? What are their particular talents and attributes? Or, what's bad about them? So sometimes you have to take into account that people aren't actually going to be very good at making decisions for themselves, because the desire to reach the end result will be so overwhelming that it will blind them to actually making good judgments.
This question of the search for authenticity, for making it as real an experience as possible in order to serve the purpose of the show, is something that sort of you all keep coming back to. There are times when I think broadcasters are more conservative about that search for authenticity. There are times when they are braver about it. Do you think that at the moment, despite the things that have happened on some of these shows, the channel is feeling brave about sort of continuing to push that search for authenticity and authentic experiences, even with the sort of the risks that they can carry? What do you think, Kelly?
It's an interesting question, because it kind of it bleeds into the question of, has this genre reached its peak? I think authenticity is always going to matter, because as a viewer you want to watch something that's real, and that's just I think forever going to be the case. I mean, The Island, and for that matter Hunted, and others of shows in this genre, are not based on reality though. They're based on fancy, a dream, something that's completely made up in the producer's mind, and I think that's fine, and that's a good starting point for telly. But then within that, you then want those experiences. You want to be able to believe when you're watching that you're watching something that is true to what happened, and true to how those people feel and what they got out of it. And so I think that will always be the case. I mean, in terms of pushing it further, I don't know where that further would be. I guess my feeling from for Fact at Channel 4 is that I feel like we as a channel are really well served for shows like these. All of these shows are hits, they're really successful, they do a really good job, and certainly for me to commission another new extreme factual show would need a really big turn of the wheel.
I think Moses has got some very, very good ideas about where he can take it in terms of more extreme. David, did you, when you took in your Mutiny idea to the channel,
yes.
did, no idea, or very few ideas come in fully formed, they're usually iterative.
No, and definitely not.
Did you feel a pressure to really push the elements of exposure, of risk, of jeopardy, in order to secure the commission?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about the jeopardy in this one, because you just had to read Bligh's journal to know that this was a truly horrendous experience.
There are many ways you could have executed it without sort of risking kidney failure.
But I suppose, well, yes, but that would be a different kind of thing. I mean, so I mean, they were very different. I mean, obviously, what we wanted, Ian Duncan and I went in to see Rob Coldstream, and we'd often talked about, where do we go next with Living History? I mean, that's something that's a recurrent theme that's been going on for years. And just to take this as an adventure, and even that, I mean, there have been attempts to do these things before with Shackleton and things like that. where, you know, you put a bunch of blokes in anoraks and they all go and sail off into the, you know, across the sea and climb mountains and do all the rest of it. And it just doesn't quite engage. You don't, because you actually want a mixture of people who are going to be genuinely, you know, overawed by this. And believe me, that first night in the boat, some of those people didn't think they were going to make it. And some people who have experience. And I think for us, you know, casting it, getting that balance between people who knew what they were doing, and incidentally, Ant particularly know what he's doing when it comes to sailing, which is why we had to have a sailing person. But by the end of it, my God, he knew everything, and he proved himself fantastically as a leader, which was great. So all I'm saying is that mixture, we wanted it to be driven by the characters, and how much history and how much reality was a constant seesaw, really. And in fact, what happened was that we weren't sure how much they were going to engage with that journal to begin with, because the journal was a key thing. Day by day, they read this thing, but by the end of it, they're going, "Oh my God, you know, this thing is haunting us. This is really haunting us," because they really felt it. And that's, I think, what I would take from this is they felt the history at a deep emotional level. So you've got something which is, you know, working as a history programme and as a reality show, because you've got all the characters and all the craziness with Chris and all the rest of it. And right from the beginning, we always knew that in Mutiny, we had to live up to the name.
So completely fascinating. I'd love to hear more about that, but you didn't really answer my question, which was whether you felt any pressure from the channel to up the extreme elements of the show, the extreme factual.
I don't think so, because it was extreme. I mean, we were pushing it to be as extreme as possible. I think that's right, isn't it, Kelly? Kelly was actually a consultant on this, because I think what the channel felt was, oh, Windfall, you know, you do all these sort of science, history, factual stuff. What the hell do you know about reality TV? And so they were a bit nervous about us taking it on. And so, and we did indeed we took lessons from the island. It was a genuine hybrid. I mean, that's what it was. Really but we were all. I didn't feel pressure to make it more extreme. How can it be any more extreme than open boat crossing 4,000 miles of the Pacific? I mean, Jesus. Well, it could have been a bit more extreme. Bligh did it with 18 people, but maritime safety wouldn't allow it.
But there is a tension in there, though, because I've had the opposite experience in lots of ways, which is you sometimes find commissioning, not anyone in particular, but they want to have their cake and eat it a bit on this, so they'll push as hard as they can on the authenticity line and then pull on the risk factor. And you get yourself caught in a really, really difficult bind, I find, where you can't have it both, or it's very difficult to have it both ways, and you have to have a really good relationship with a commissioner where you can be honest with them about what you really think about all of that, because they are also caught in a bit of a bind. And I found that really hard on SAS personally, that kind of pushing here and pulling there. Yeah. And I think we kind of got there in the end, but it wasn't scientific.
And I think that's what you were saying earlier on, Kelly, which is that it's not scientific. It has to be a very active and dynamic conversation of trust between a supplier and a commissioner.
And whilst there's a statute, and you've got to honour the statute, a lot of it is about gut. A lot of it is about morals and emotions and psychology and instinct.
Because, of course, the truth is we all want shit to happen. It's just that...
the right level of shit. Yeah, I know. Like, no organs being lost, shit.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think that you know, the hope is that as a commissioner, you appreciate the pull and the push from the producers, because you need that constant. Otherwise, you don't find the right line. So if you didn't have that constant push, I would worry and think it's, you know, you're not going to get what you need. So I think it's got to be that constant push and pull. That's the only way you get.
But it feels a little bit like sometimes in commissioning, it's a bit like if you detect a little less intensity than you want, you go more intensity, and then if it's too intense, you're a bit like less intensity. And so it's somewhere in there you're kind of working it out. But
but do you know what I think personally? I think, you know, what we're doing on TV now to what was possible 10 years ago, it's a lot more extreme now, even from the legal aspect of it. I think 5, 10 years, whatever from now, things are going to be a lot more extreme, and we will have to break past this barriers that's set now. It's just, you know, what channel is going to do it first, or what commissioner is going to say, do you know what, let's just do it. But we can't keep things on the same level.
Dominic's face.
You know. Dominic,
You know my views, Colin.
There has to be more, you know, you can't stay here, you know.
Moses is raising a really, really good point. In an era of, you know, sort of by and large unregulated YouTube, appealing to 16 to particularly younger audiences with ever more kind of, it's not even about per se danger, but it's to do with shit, I haven't seen that before, you know, and danger does correlate quite closely with shit, I haven't seen that before. So, you know, where do you as a channel that, you know, has a particular remit and sense of responsibility towards engaging younger audiences in big issues, as you were saying earlier on, but via a language and a sort of, you know, vernacular that they respond to fast, where, you know, what is your answer to Moses's challenge?
Interesting, coming back to the previous conversation about conversations between commissioners and producers, there's lots of conversations within the channel as well. You know, if you've got a commissioner saying, I want to make this as authentic experience as I can, well, quite often, you know, people in our team will be saying, yeah, okay, but how do we get there? There may be different routes to authenticity which don't involve the same amount of close to the edge risk. So how you do things is actually in some ways more important than, you know, you can get the end result, but not necessarily by the route you thought you were going to get there. So, I mean, my job is to serve creative ambition. If people come up with the ideas, we will try and find whether you can do that legally and, you know, allowing for acceptable risk. But people have to come up with the ideas having thought about them. You know, people will come in with the most ridiculous concepts where they haven't thought it through at all. And one meeting with a commissioner, and I've sat in umpteen meetings with commissioners, where a commissioner and a lawyer will start picking apart the plan, having just read a 2-page brief. And so people have the ambition, but not necessarily have done the planning. You can do an awful lot of stuff on television, and you probably could push beyond where things are just now. But it takes an enormous amount of planning and effort.
The safety manual for Mutiny, by the way, was about twice the size of this booklet.
Yes,
I mean,
but
it was
what
incredible.
I would say is that I think that the legal team at Channel 4 are absolutely there, and to, you know, the support that they give commissioning and producers to try to make things possible rather than to try to stop them is, you know, absolutely brilliant and very particular, I think, to Channel 4. And it's one of the reasons why the channel has been able to do the things we've done. And I think the question of YouTube and actually people taking this stuff into their own hands is something that we're all going to have to grapple with in the not too distant future. And it's definitely something that as a channel, you know, we need to start to think about and work out the ways that we can address that.
And that's where new kinds of programmes will probably come from asking the difficult questions.
That's exciting, right? That's how innovation happens, and that's how we get places, and that's how we do something new. So that feels to me a really exciting prospect. How on earth we're going to do it, I don't know. But when you don't know how to do something, that good things happen. So I feel like that's a positive thing that we can all look forward to, and ideas in that space is, you know, would be great and feel really exciting, and that maybe that's the way that we're going to turn that next wheel.
So we've got some more clips, and there's a lot more we could talk about, but it's gone really fast. So can I ask if anybody would like to ask any of our talented panellists some questions about where next creatively, where next from a sort of legal point of view, an ethical point of view? Oh, look, it's Sarah.
I'm just really intrigued about what the conversation was like that you two had. So what is the difference in terms of the skill set of the specialist factual specialist and the skill set of the fact-ent specialist? What were the 3 biggest headlines that you were able to tell David that he didn't already know or that he needed to?
I think a lot of it was to do with casting, actually. I mean, the casting is so important in this thing, and I think we did in the end, get the casting right, but it was really tricky getting that balance, because we could have filled the boat with a bunch of bozos and the whole thing would have ended in disaster. Or we could have filled them with a lot of people that knew about sailing, and then it would have been boring. So how you get that balance right was I think, really quite tricky, wasn't it?
I think it was the conversations that we had were either about casting or they were about actually how to do it.
Yes.
So the lessons from the island of actually how
Embedded,
it's possible.
the embedded shooters were also, we used some of the island ones.
All those things that the clip that was shown about the rushes. So you know, that key thing on the island about the fact that they are alone and being able to say that they are alone and what that means and how you protect that was something that was really important on Mutiny as well. So we talked about that a lot, about the actual kind of logistics of it and how to make that work. But also I think we talked a lot about how to get drama out of a tiny boat with a number of men on it.
Which was a huge worry, yeah.
And how were we going to do that? And how would that... So it was
luckily
sort of
Chris
those two
provided some of
things
the drama.
and casting, I would say.
Anybody else? I think everybody just wants to lie down. Over there. Yes.
I just wanted to ask Moses how it changed your life and what you're doing now.
Where do I start with that? Mentally, I'm not scared of anything anymore. I feel as though I understand fear a lot more, and I feel able to do whatever I have to do. Like my fear of heights, my fear of water, my fear of sleep. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's all gone, and I just feel able to do whatever I want to do.
Do you think that transparency within the programmes can help push the boundaries in some way? So by being honest about the risks that are involved and by being honest with the audience, that you're able to sort of push the boundaries a bit more. For example, in Mutiny, where you actually made that part of the story, whereas perhaps in SAS, hiding the shade maybe wasn't part of the story. Is there something there?
It's a good question, that, because I think that was one of the things we did debate, because how much do you give away the fact that the support ship is there all the time? And we took a decision not to really talk about it too much until we actually did need to intervene. And so I think the first time you became aware of it was when Ben hurt his hand and stuff, and we had to medevac him out. So I think but it is tricky, that, because you don't want to, for the audience as well, you don't want to blow the bubble of the Bly experience. And if you have too much about all that sort of other stuff, the transparent, then it kind of spoils the show. So I would say what we decided was to go for the minimum amount, only when you absolutely need it, but to be honest when we did intervene.
But I think that is right, which is that if you don't allow any intervention, the only way to allow intervention is to film it, because otherwise you're not being honest. So the transparency of that is absolutely crucial, and we would have had to stop many of these experiments much sooner than we did if we hadn't been transparent about that. So I think it is, that decision, and we're used to it now, but those were new things that nobody had ever really done, and the first decisions to have interventions that were transparent were really big decisions, because you're always worried about how the audience is going to feel about that. That whole hiding the hand of the producer thing is we're all trained in that, aren't we? For years, forever, for decades, that's how telly's been made. So that sort of knocking down that wall is a really big decision, but I think that it's absolutely the right thing to do, and the audience has stayed with the shows because of it, and do then genuinely, it actually feeds the authenticity rather than anything else.
Colin, do you think that we're going to get to a point where quite soon when we think, oh look, it's another dehydrated bloke on Channel 4? I mean, is there a risk?
I'll never tire of that.
It just becomes too familiar.
Possibly. I think that's where it comes back to why you're doing it. In the end, if you're not doing it if it's not earthed by something other than it's a dehydrated bloke on Channel 4, then yeah, people will turn off, definitely. But if it continues to be a vehicle to get at other things, whether that's mental health, whether it's masculinity, whether it's, I think the thing for me is how do you find a way of doing this with women? Because it feels the island's obviously an exception, but it feels a little bit like, even though a female audience will watch a lot of these programmes, and it doesn't discriminate in that sense, but I think it's a definite sense in which broadcasters have struggled and producers have struggled to work out a way of turning extreme factual to the experience of women and what that would be. I don't know why that is. I think it's something to do with the word extreme. But I would be really interested to see where that went. So I think there are still turns to go, but it has to be earthed by some kind of purpose.
Kelly, do you think that in the way that the Channel and David sort of kind of melded this to history? Do you sort of see it as something that's got sort of infinite potential, so long as it adapts Colin's point about purpose, the sort of other, I suppose the purpose of Mutiny.
Do you mean extreme factual?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the answer to that is we don't know, do we? You never know when the audience is going to tire of something. I mean, my feeling is everything that we've talked about today remains true, which is these shows work for all kinds of reasons, and they do allow you into things that aren't about survival, that aren't about extremity, that aren't about... And so for that, I think that they're always serve a purpose for the audience. I guess my feeling is just that as a channel, we are very well served for them. So we have a lot of these shows. So I guess, are they top of my priority list to come up with the next extreme factual? No, because I think, not because they don't work and they aren't good and we don't want them, but because they do work and they're going to continue.
And they're going to be, and they are being emulated elsewhere.
Exactly, but if we could think about the Mutiny did something new. I think Colin's point is absolutely right. The island has had women on it, but they are series that have tended to be about men, although we've got a new series coming called Escape, which does have lots of women in it. But I think there are new ways to go with it that we haven't looked at. But
I think one thing I was going to say to add to that was that I suppose certainly from our perspective, I mean, this was actually trying to introduce history to a new audience, and I think that was a very delicate balance. But it did skew quite young, and I think a young audience wouldn't necessarily come to a kind of traditional documentary about the mutiny on the Bounty. They just wouldn't watch it. The older, and so I think that was definitely, I think, part of the channel strategy. I know Rob was always very keen that this would be something that we'd push through, so that you'd get people coming to history and then the older audience coming to reality, and so you're trying to get at both ends of the audience.
And do you think you succeeded in
well, I hope we did. I mean, the numbers, for the young side of the audience look pretty good for anyway. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, any more questions from the... Yes, at the back there.
Can I just ask a question about insurance, which is a really boring topic?
No, you can't.
I'm fascinated about how on earth you get these shows insured, because the amount of caveats around insurance and how can you predict, particularly on a first series of, say, The Island or Mutiny, and also just the risk you take as a production company, I guess, that if something goes terribly wrong, with all of these carve-outs in your insurance saying, you're not covered for X, Y, and Z. I mean, you must feel like you're just risking your company at all times when you make these.
Yes. What can I say? Yes, it did feel like we have very many nerve-wracking experiences, and as I say, you just have to plan it so carefully, and you have to the insurance brokers obviously need to be reassured by that. They ask questions, detailed interrogation.
It's a good point, because insurers will insure for anything.
They will, ultimately.
But they don't necessarily pay out for everything.
Yeah, well, that's it. There were lots of exclusions.
My experience in a previous life doing litigation was insurers are quite reluctant to pay out on even the most trivial things sometimes. So you do have to, but the planning is everything. Because if you've planned for it and they've seen what you're going to do, if they then try and wriggle out of it, you've got a good argument against them. But that's why the limits on these programmes are not legal. The limits are often editorial and budgetary. To do these programmes, you may need experts. You may need lots of experts. You may sometimes. We had one where Lev was going through the Americas. He went diving. He got the bends. We had to get specialist advice from specialist doctors. That was not a contingency we had expected to have to get. So if they're not properly funded and they're not properly planned, and the editorial ambition's not thought through, you're not going to get a programme where your insurance is going to work terribly well.
Be warned. Any last questions from against the lights? I can't see if there are any more hands up. I think that is it.
No,
Is there
someone in the back
Oh,
waving.
I'm so sorry that I missed you. Please, go ahead. Yes.
Just on a similar tack, I just wondered with like the water situation, where do you stand legally? Like if they're in their boat, they don't want to take water. If they say no, I'm not having any water. Where do you stand?
It's on to the lawyer.
The lawyer isn't. You've put them in the boat. You know, you can stop the filming. You can take them off, and you can say to them, "Fine, you can go now. You can go away and not drink now, but you're not doing it in our time." That's what you do.
It's worth mentioning, isn't it, Dr. Tom, that particular clip with the water you saw from Mutiny. By the time we got to that stage, we were on sort of pretty much hourly conversations with us at the channel and they were in the boat assessing their state of health, and it did get to the point of that particular clip where I think Tom's colleague Mark in our legal department said if they don't actually start drinking in the next couple of hours, we are putting the show, and we would have done it.
But ultimately, it's more than a legal thing. I mean, it was just human decency. You just cannot do it. I mean, there's no doubt. It's not a legal thing.
And a lot of these conversations aren't about. They come down to.
Did you feel on that particular one, just going back to the conversations we've had about how often these lines aren't hard and fast, and there's something actually very positive about the fact there's a bit of rub and a bit of... At that particular juncture, did you feel absolutely aligned as producers and broadcasters and lawyers?
Definitely.
Or was there a debate about what to do and when?
There was some debate, but I mean, I think we all felt the same way. I mean, it was more a question of how do you convince them that they're not losing face. That's what it was all about.
Quite often in these situations, it's about communication. It's about actually getting the information about what's actually happening. And sometimes it's a bit to and fro about that. But I've found in the situations we've had as a channel where things have, interventions have had to be made, actually everybody sees the sense in it. And even the contributors see the sense in it afterwards when you actually explain it to them.
Unless they're Moses. Okay, on that note, I think we will wrap up probably, and I just want to say thank you very much to everybody for coming along. Thank you very much to the panel. Wherever this genre or set of influences goes next, I think we can all agree that Channel 4 has undoubtedly made it their own and has made some terrific programmes as part of it. So well done, everybody.